Welcome to the wonderful world of wine, exploring all things wine with you. We are your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lenzi, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the wonderful world of wine. Every week, Mark and myself discuss trending topics in the wine world. And this week, our topic of conversation is going to be shelf life. How long does something last on the shelf, whether it's open or unopened? And diverging a little bit from our usual topics, we're not only going to cover wine, but we are also going to talk about spirits and beer and my favorite topics, sparkling wine, and all of those wonderful things that we enjoy, maybe on a daily basis, but certainly on a weekly basis. Don't we, Mark?
Yes, it's something different. It's something that's been a
Yeah.
lot of articles lately out there about when is a beer good, when is wine good, when is liquor go bad. So we figure we put it all together and do a little show on it. And first, Kim, I think we've been kind of hinting on your beer education lately. And I think it's time now we tell the listeners what you've been doing for your beer education and all the good things you've been doing, because we're going to work beer in a little bit today, and then we're going to do a segment where we're going to pair, if you drink this beer, what wine can you drink type
Yep.
of segment coming up. So let us know what you've been up to in the beer world.
Yeah. So, in addition to my wine studies and my wine teaching, I have spent the last 3 years working on so it's sort of the beer equivalent of the certified sommelier program. So, there is a couple of certification agencies that I have been taking their programs and studying and testing and tasting for quite a few years now. And I guess it just turns out that I like carbonation because now that I'm focusing on champagne and beer, everything I seem to love has bubbles in it. So my first big certification came through in the fall. I am a certified Cicerone, which is the kind of the equivalent of a beer sommelier, and took me a couple of years of study and practice and tasting and pretty much thinking an awful lot about beer styles, beer flavors, how it's made, pairing with food, all of that sort of fun stuff that I do with wine, I also now do with beer. In addition to that, the main educational group that the Commonwealth Wine School works with out of London, which is the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, rolled out their brand new beer program just this past early spring. And I was lucky enough to be chosen for the inaugural class of educators for that as well. So I was handpicked, I can say, to be one of the first folks in the United States to be qualified to teach their beer education program to anybody, really, if you're in the beverage industry or you just like beer a lot. So I now am teaching a number of classes. So I do their certification. I do a level 1 and a level 2, and I'm going to have all sorts of fun beer classes coming up at the Commonwealth Wine School, one which you just alluded to, Mark. So I'm going to do a beer for wine drinkers class. So I will hopefully be able to give you a little bit of a preview of that in a future show as we add that to our topic of conversations. So thank you for letting me kind of talk about what I've been working on, but it's been very exciting, and I've met some really wonderful people and don't have to dress up when I deal with beer people, and now I need to go get a tattoo. So it's all very interesting, and kind of a professional shift. Just like I get really, really excited about champagne, I also get really, really excited about beer. So it's been fun.
Yeah, congratulations. Well, it's
Thank
so
you.
exciting. And we wanted to work it into the show, the announcement for our listeners. As she was doing all these studies, she was traveling to France, doing the champagne, still
I
running the
traveled a lot last year.
Yeah, still running the wine school, still being a mom. So you had so much going on, and it's just great. At least the more education opportunities, it leads us to talk about more things on the show.
Yeah.
And Kim said we're going to do a show in the future where what beer for wine drinkers type of thing, where I'm going to hit her with some beers and she's going to tell us what the wine you be drinking, stuff like that. So
He's just gonna throw things at me.
yeah, a
I
lot
have
of
to
ideas,
talk about it.
and amazingly still skinny, taking all the beer classes
Oh,
too.
thank
So
you.
I
Not
don't,
as not as skinny.
we have to do a show on that, how to prevent the beer belly. But
I wish I had prevented the beer belly. I'm yeah. Ugh.
so great.
If you'd seen me during COVID, a little bit different.
Well, congratulations. So we're going to start the shelf life talk with beer
Yeah.
because there was an article in Vine Peer. Does beer expire? And is it okay to drink old beer? Now, this is something in the industry. They always say, what's the rotation rule? First in, for
Fir-
last, first in,
First in, first out.
first out, rotate the beer. They're going on dates, blah, blah, blah. So tell us, Kim, does beer expire? Is it bad to drink old beer?
Yes and no. So, yes, beer does expire and it actually goes downhill a whole lot quicker than most wine does. But just like wine, if you drink old beer or beer that is sort of past its prime, it's not going to hurt you. And this is one of those magical things about alcohol. As we mentioned in our previous show a couple of weeks ago, alcohol is a really, really good protection against microbial growth in our beverages. So, because wine and beer and spirits have appropriate amounts of alcohol in them for their type of beverage, they don't allow bacteria or mold or fungus, or you're not going to necessarily have, a big, fresh, hoppy flavor to your beer. It might start to taste kind of stale. It might not taste as good. It might not taste good at all, but it's not going to hurt you. And I tell people this all the time. So even if you have like a wicked old bottle of wine that is starting to like turn to vinegar, that's still not going to hurt you because you eat vinegar all the time, I'm sure, in dishes and on maybe French fries or whatever. So as these things get old, you might not want to drink them just because they're not tasting the way that they're supposed to taste, but there's nothing dangerous in there. It's not like spoiled milk or old chicken or cheese that's got a really suspicious looking mold growing on it. So, not bad for you, but not going to taste the way it's supposed to.
And there's a few things that will affect the beer going bad faster. And it's the same
Absolutely.
things we're going to talk about when we talk about the wine and
Yeah,
we
there's
talk
so
about the
much crossover.
spirits,
There's so
right?
much. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what are those main things, Kim, to protect your beverages from
Yeah.
lasting a little longer?
So the things that will degrade your beverage, and this is going to happen to everything eventually, is light, oxygen, heat, and time. Now, you can't outrun time. So eventually, everything will get a little bit too old and it's just not going to taste the way that it is supposed to taste. But there are things that you can do to protect your beverages from all of those other things. So, for beer specifically, light can be very, very dangerous. Most beers are brewed with hops. And hops are the ingredient in beer that gives it its bitterness, but also its really bright, fresh, aromatic qualities. So if you've ever smelled a beer and it smells like, I don't know, tropical fruit or pine trees or flowers or anything like that, chances are that has come from the hops. And hops are just a plant. And what happens is that there are oils in the hops that give us the aromas, give us the bitterness, but they don't like sunlight and they don't like UV light. So when light comes in contact with those oils from the hops, it can impact the flavor of the beer. And this is when we get what we call a quote unquote skunky beer. It starts to just smell off, smells literally like skunk spray. Sometimes people think it smells like really bad marijuana. It's not necessarily something that you want in your beer. So protecting beer from light is very, very important, which is one of the reasons why I love that so many wonderful craft beers come in cans these days, because cans really protect from light. And they also protect from oxygen. And just like wine is affected by exposure to oxygen, beer is also damaged by too much oxygen exposure. But I would say that for beer, light is the big killer.
We had that whole conversation in the past about glass color
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Green glass
beer.
versus
Yeah,
brown
beer
glass.
is
Uh
in
huh.
brown glass because it prevents from the light. But the wine is in green, and why don't they put wine in brown to help prevent the light damage on wine? Remember, we had this whole conversation.
They can. I actually had this question in a class a few weeks ago from a student. We were talking about wine and we were talking about like how wine go bad. And the one of my students asked the question, they're like, does wine get skunked as well? And then I'm like, well, now the train's gone off the rails because now I'm going to talk about skunky beer. And so, of course, I went off on a tangent about hops. But no, so wine does not get damaged by light in the same way that beer gets damaged by light. So you're not going to get that skunkiness in wine, but you are certainly going to get damage to the wine if it is exposed to too much light. I mean, the only wines that I generally see in clear glass are either rosé that they want you to see the color of, or something white that is meant for really immediate consumption. But I see plenty of brown bottles out there.
Yeah, not yeah.
Yeah, yeah, some green. I mean, just from tradition, but overall, it's brown, and brown bottles are pretty good at protecting the beverages inside from light exposure.
So you mentioned light, you mentioned oxygen, heat, time, and time.
Yep, and time.
Things. A lot of times, the IPA seem to be for style of beer seems to be ones they're saying you have to drink them right away.
Yeah.
Is it just because the hops don't give off as much aromatics? So
it's the opposite. Actually, so it's that the hops used in IPAs are so aromatic, but they fade really quickly. So if we're talking sort of the equivalent for wine, think of a bright, fresh, really tropical New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc that you open that bottle and you pour yourself a glass and you just get a nose full of that big aroma from that New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. But if you were to age that thing for 2 years, those aromas would really start to fade. And it's the same thing for those really big, bright hop aromas. And because the aromas for hops are really reliant on the oils, they evaporate really quickly. So you want to drink that style of beer fresh because it's going to get dull fairly quickly, like within 6 months of it being packaged. So that's one of the styles.
Not as fresh, but
not as, so it's
still,
a freshness. It's a freshness
you can still
issue.
drink it, but it won't kill you.
It won't kill you.
Okay.
It won't even hurt you. It's just, it's not going to taste or smell as big and bold and bright as the brewer expected it to.
So another tip, this happens to me a lot. I go to my parents' house, they hand me a beer they have in their fridge, and it's a light beer that has the logo from the 70s on it still. So I know it's been in their fridge a long time. What's a tip for our listeners? What style of beer can you put down and it just lasts forever? I know like Sam Adams makes their Utopia. It's more so those like barley wines, those type of wines, beer, excuse me. We're so into the wine.
I do the same thing.
Those last the longest because they're higher in alcohol typically.
Yeah, so a lot of the time it's the same rules that we use for wine for what ages also works for beer. So for wine, we say that that a wine needs 2 out of 3 things in order for it to be age worthy. It needs to have structure, so high tannins or high acidity, and or high sugar, and or high flavor concentration. And beer is the same way. So you need something that either has a lot of body, so like a lot of malt character, or a lot of alcohol. There are certain styles of Belgian beers that are also brewed with bacteria that make them sour acidity. So you either have a lot of sugar or a lot of structure or a lot of acidity in a beer that will give it the longevity that it needs in order to age. So there are certain styles that last longer than others. Barley wine, sometimes some big porters. There are a number of styles of stouts that are a little higher in alcohol and a little higher in body, and some of those sour Belgian beers, and those do last a fair amount of time. If it's a wine, see, I'm doing the same thing. If it's a wine, if it's a beer that also has some of the yeast sediment still in the bottle, so if it's a beer that has been bottle conditioned, just like those champagnes I love so much, those also are a little bit more age-worthy because having a little bit of yeast in the bottle acts as a preservative. So that can be helpful as well. So if you ever find a bottle of beer, if you have a local craft shop that has some bottled beers that have like a almost like a champagne cork on the top, they might have a little cage on the top. That's usually an indication that is a bottle barrel conditioned beer and that it is a little bit more age worthy too.
And you mentioned about canned beer. A lot of popularity in craft beer now is 16-ounce cans.
Yep.
There was an article in tastingtable.com. How do you store canned beers? And they said it can stay fresh for up to 2 years. Any tips on storing canned beers?
2 years seems a little long.
If
I know
stored
that
correctly.
if still, well, yeah, but and you really don't know what your can of beer has gone through before it got to your hands. So you might be doing everything that you possibly can to store it correctly, but you don't know necessarily how the store handled it. You don't know how the distributor handled it. You don't know how it got to you. Was it on a truck or a train or a boat or an airplane or so you don't necessarily know what it went through before it got to you, but all you can do is do the best that you can with the beer that you have in your hands. And what I suggest to people is consistent temperature. And I know this is one of the sort of beer myths that get thrown around a lot, that once a beer is cold, you can never bring it back to room temperature because you will destroy it. That is false. You don't
It
want it
does
to
not
go.
skunk it
It
either,
doesn't
right?
skunk it. No,
Right.
because that's all about light. It's not about temperature. So if you have a beer in your fridge and it comes to room temperature, but you didn't get to drink it and so you want to put it back in the fridge, go ahead. You're not really going to hurt it. But what you don't want to do is leave it in the car. It gets to 95 degrees. You take it out, you put it in the fridge, and then you bring it to your brother-in-law's house and it's sitting in the car again. It gets back up to 95 degrees. Like, you don't want to do that, but it's not going to kill it if you bought it cold and then let it come up to room temperature and then you put it back in the refrigerator. So don't worry. You haven't
Yeah.
destroyed that,
I'm so
nice
glad you
can of Heady
mentioned that.
Topper if you did
Yeah.
that to it.
I'm glad you mentioned that because a lot of times the craft beers, when they're delivered in a refrigerated truck
Yeah,
and they'll say on them keep cold. So
right.
the store has to really pay attention to what the brewer is saying, how to treat their wine, how to
Right.
store. Yeah, here we are again. To treat their beer. Most of the time, they recommend keeping it cool the whole time. So if you are shopping for these beers and you see it on the shelf and it says keep in the refrigerator and it's on the shelf, you know it hasn't been stored properly before you bought it, like you were mentioning. The other thing about temperature, I always tell people is, especially in New England here, that beer changes temperature a lot. It's just the
Yeah.
extreme thing you have to watch out for. You figure the distributor loads it on a truck maybe at night. It's winter. It's sitting in the truck. It's out all day in the freezing cold. And then it comes into the warm store. Or it's going into the cold cooler. I mean, it does change. So like you said, you have to be careful, but you'll know if you're shopping a retailer and you get a beer and it's not really right, that something's happened between the time you got it off their shelf that wasn't handled properly. So good tips there to watch for.
Yeah. I mean, all you as a consumer can do is try to shop intelligently at shops that take care of their product. So make friends with your local store, including Mark at Franklin Liquors, Franklin, Massachusetts. There are certainly a lot of places around that do only specialize in craft beer or in specialty beers, who I have gotten to know in the area, and they are wonderful people and they care, just like people who run fine wine shops care about the wine on their shelf. People who focus on specialty beer care about what is on their shelf, and they want to make sure that you are getting the best beer experience because, number one, they care about the product, but number two, they want you to come back and buy some more. So
Right.
they're going to treat it just like Fancy Cheese Shop is going to be handling their cheeses with care. Shops like Mark's are going to be handling their items with care as well. So all you can do is do your best to shop at places that care about the product, but then handle it well when you get home. But I just don't want people to, freak out if they bought it and then it sat on the kitchen floor for a while because it didn't get put away. I want people to be comfortable with the idea that it's not that delicate of a product that it's going to immediately go bad. But as far as shelf life and shelf life of beers in can, our conventional wisdom that we were taught was 6 months to a year. and to give imported beers a little bit more time, only because they are a little bit harder to move off of the shelf because there might be certain styles that people don't necessarily buy a lot of because they are a little bit less understood. And I'm all about like traditional German beers. I really, really love German beers, but it's very hard for you to find certain styles because a lot of them are also very seasonal. So just like something like, I don't know, rosé, where you purchase it kind of seasonally and we drink a lot of it in the spring and the summer. There's seasonality to beer as well. And Sam Adams, you know that every month there's another limited edition seasonal beer coming out. And this is very typical of beers that are out there. You know, we have certain summer styles, we have fall styles, we have winter styles. So I recommend to people that in order to be able to drink the freshest that you possibly can, drink seasonally. Kind of like when you go to the farmer's market and you get whatever that farmer picked yesterday or that morning. Drink seasonally as well as eat seasonally, and you're going to get the freshest, most wonderful things that you possibly can.
Yeah, great tip. The pumpkin beers are not going to be tasting
Oh,
good in
you
the
and your pumpkin
summertime.
beers.
No, I'm just saying that's the best example to give the listeners right there.
Oktoberfest. Come
Yeah,
on.
there you go.
I feel like I've been drinking my weight in Maybach or Maibach. Maibach is how it's pronounced this season, which is sort of the springtime equivalent of Oktoberfest from Germany. It's a little bit higher in alcohol, but I really, really like them.
Nice. You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. For more information about Kim, you can go to her website, commonwealthwineschool.com. For more information about myself, you can go to franklinliquors.com. We are supported by Franklin Public Radio. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. You can now send Kim all your beer questions and send us any comments you have about our show. All our past episodes are on SoundCloud and iTunes. So we've been talking today about storing liquor and the shelf life of liquor, starting with beer. We're naming this show Shelf Life Talk, and you heard all Kim's passion for beer. Now we're going to move on to some shelf life of liquor, and then we're going to finish it out with some wine talk, because that's what we're here for. So Kim, there was a article in liquor.com just mentioning briefly what the life is of these liquor bottles people have around their house. And I always tell people, if you see liquor around your house and it still has the old tax stamp on it, it's probably old. And then I was thinking, I always say that, but I never knew when they stopped using the tax stamp on liquor. Do you remember the tax stamps, Kim, or are you too young for that?
Okay, well, you're gonna have to tell me when I'm gonna
Do you
back up.
remember the tax stamp being on the top of spirits, liquor bottles?
I do, but
They,
only because when I was a little girl,
here
my
we go.
parents had a bar in our basement and they don't really drink. So we had liquor in our bar, and I was born in the 1970s, and there must have been liquor in that bar from probably the 1960s because they weren't very old when they got married, that I remember that was still there when they moved out of the house. Which was many decades later. So I do remember the stamp. Yes.
Yep.
So,
Same with me when I was a kid, the parents' bar, and that's where I remember the ripping the little stamps off the top. But
yep.
it ended
Yep.
in 1984. They stopped using tax
Okay.
stamp in
Okay.
1984.
I was around and cognizant
And I'm hoping some
by
of
the
our
mid 80s.
listeners know about that, what it was. But anyway, if you're finding liquor in your house and it has the seal on the top, the tax seal, you know it's been there for quite a while. Again, storage of liquor is no different than beer, no different than wine. It's affected by sunlight, temperature, also by if it has a seal, if once you open it, you tightly seal it back. Distilled spirits, they won't really expire, but they will lose their flavor. Over the years, the colors will change, the flavors will change. They're not going to kill you, just like bad beer or old beer. It's not going to kill you, but the flavors are not going to be what they were when you first opened them. So, Kim, did you see anything with shelf life of liquor that kind of surprised you or was new to you?
A lot of this was actually not much that I knew about. And I have to say is probably an awful lot in my liquor cabinet that is older than these articles would suggest that you keep things. I had always been under the impression that something like gin or vodka or whatever could pretty much last forever. And these articles are kind of saying, like, no, like a few years, but really no longer than that. And I certainly know that I have a lot of alcohol in my bar that is older than my children. So that was interesting. There were a couple of things that I did know. So, for example, like vermouth and amaros. And because a lot of those are wine based, I have just always known how to handle those. But as far as actual spirits, I'm a little bit in the dark on this one. So this knowledge that I got from reading these articles was actually really, really interesting to me and new information for me.
In the distilled spirits, they were saying they will start to lose their flavor between 1 and 3 years. So up to 3 years, you could still have the exact flavor of an opened distilled spirit. But liqueurs, less time, between 6 months and a year, they start kind
Yes,
of
that was
dropping.
so shocking to me.
We're not talking cream based
No, and I've
liqueurs,
had
so
issues
be
with that. We can
careful.
we can
Yeah.
revisit the Bailey's Irish Cream.
Yeah, I mean they have dates on most of the cream-based things will have dates on them when they go bad. It means bad. They could
Yeah, they
curdle,
curdle. It's
things can
gross.
happen. So
Yeah.
those you just be careful with those. And Kim mentioned the wine-based vermouth. They say if refrigerated,
Hmm.
within 6 to 8 weeks, it might start dropping off. So you'll get some time if it's refrigerated. One of the things about liquor is you store it, it can heat up. You're facing evaporation issues. So the temperature is very important with liquor, of losing evaporation on the product. So just be careful with that. And an interesting note they put in the liquor.com article, Kim, is you don't want to put liquor on its side if it has a cork
Yes.
because the alcohol eats away at the cork.
This was new knowledge for me. This was fascinating. And I mean, I wouldn't necessarily store liquor on its side anyway. I would just be afraid of leakage because really the only things that I store on their side are wine in the refrigerator that has a screw cap. So anything that's open, I always will stand up except for a bottle of wine that has a screw cap because I trust that screw cap. But I would just think that it would leak, but I never even considered that a higher percentage of alcohol could do damage to a cork. That just, nope, never even entered my
Yeah,
brain.
it
So
was new
that
to me
that is
too.
really cool info.
Then there was a bunch of articles from tastingtable.com. I've been really getting a lot of these articles lately, Kim. I don't know if you've been following the publication a lot. They do really quick, short stories. They have
Yeah,
titles that it bring you in and then it's like a 5 second
I know it's
read,
like really quick.
right? But they talked about storing distilled spirits, and they were saying because of the high alcohol, low sugar, it makes these things very shelf stable. But once you open them, things starting to happen. The quality starts going down, but it won't make you sick. And again, the heat, the light, air exposure. Try to use airtight containers or toppers, cool space, no sunlight. And then they mentioned a few things about how would you know if your liquor is bad.
Yeah, and I think that's smart for our listeners to know.
Yep,
Like,
few
how do
tips. Why
they
don't you
know?
give them?
No,
How
you
do
go
you?
ahead. You
But
I ran with beer. You're gonna run with liquor.
okay. So how would you know it's bad? It can change in color. There are a lot of liqueurs that are colored greens, yellows, whatever. They start changing their color. You can see some sediment in the liquid that things are breaking down, something's happening, and basically loss of smell. The aroma of the liquor goes away and something else starts appearing on the smell. You know it is going bad. So those are just some tips about storing and when it goes bad. They also ran another interesting 2 second article about when storing liqueurs, keep the cap clean. And I was interesting because after I read this, like, oh yeah, that happens all the time, right, Kim? You open up a sticky, sweet liqueur,
Uh-huh.
and then the cap gets all sticky, and then it like glues the cap
And you can't
on.
open it.
Yeah, yeah. So
At least
just a
I can't open it. I'm glad I live in a house full of guys because I'm like, can somebody open this for me, please?
you got to get one of those rubber grip things out and it's all chunky on the top. So
Yeah.
just a basic tip to wipe away the residue when you're using those sticky
Well, it's sugar,
liqueurs.
right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that's sugar.
It
Yeah.
prevents the sugar from crystallizing, and affects the cap seal. So just a tip on that, which, quick tip, which was good. Also on tastingtable.com, why the amount of bourbon left in the bottom of your bottle matters for storage. What did you think of this, Kim? You a bourbon drinker at
Yeah, I
all?
like bourbon actually. Bourbon is probably I prefer brown spirits to white spirits. It's a weird quirk of my palate that I don't like oaky wines, but I really like oaky spirits. So I like bourbon and I like aged tequilas and things like that. But
So
yeah,
explain,
it's
Kim, why they said what's they were talking about a chemical reaction that starts once you open a brown spirit. What's your thoughts for that for the listeners? Something
yeah, so
new?
it's sorry, go ahead.
No, is this something new that you've learned of, or you just always knew this?
No, this one was a new one for me because, like I said, I haven't studied spirits quite as much as I have for some other things. One of the things, like I was saying, that is appealing to me for these types of spirits is they're aged in oak barrels, so they have these aromas and flavors of kind of like caramel and spices and like cool things like that. And I don't necessarily find them very appealing for wine, but I really, really like them in spirits. But because they are caused by this exposure to your oak barrel, you also have to take into consideration oxidation. So whenever you open a bottle of something, you have to worry that oxygen is going to start doing its work on whatever the beverage is. So whether it's beer, whether it's wine, or whether it's spirits, oxygen is going to start to degrade that. But in addition to oxygen, there is also another chemical reaction that can take place when you have a brown spirit, and specifically for bourbon when you have an open bottle. So I don't really necessarily understand the science behind it, but it has to do with evaporation and this sort of displacement of aromas. So it's kind of back to what you said before, Mark, where like, the longer something is open, it's not going to smell as fresh. You're not going to have those beautiful aromas you would associate with your spirit. And I think that that's one of the nicest things about spirits that have been aged in oak is that you have that beautiful like spice, caramel, the aromatic profile, because when you drink it, you get a lot of the alcohol, but when you smell it, you get a lot of those really pretty like cooked sugar notes. And then if you open for a really long time, and especially when you have so much oxygen in the bottle, because as you drink it down, you're going to have less liquid and more oxygen. You're just going to lose that because it's just going to deaden over time. So yeah,
Yeah, it's
drink
just
your
a
drink your
chemical
stuff. Yeah,
reaction
it's
that
just it's science,
oxidation.
it's chemistry.
And they're saying to prevent this, just like the tip we give for wine all the time, is just kind of transfer that volume to a smaller bottle with a tighter seal, and it will preserve the bourbon a little better. So, just a couple quick tips on that. And I think bourbon and tequila certifications are kind of the ones my goal I've always had
Oh,
because they
okay.
seem to be the popular spirits lately, and there's
Yeah.
certifications for those like everything else. So, those were always on my list, but
Yeah.
pushed off. Unlike you. I
I'm
pushed
taking a
mine
break
off.
this year. This
Yeah,
2024, I'm taking a break. We'll see
nothing
what I
this
do in
year.
2025.
All right, so now we covered beer, we covered liquor. We're going to finally talk wine today, listeners.
Hey.
Yes, if you are
Although I feel like we have discussed this topic before, so this will just be a little bit of
yeah,
a
just a quick
rehash.
refresher on
Uh,
shelf life of liquors. The first story was from Vine Pier. Is it safe to drink an open bottle of wine after 1 week? And once again, once you open something, the oxygen's eating at that wine. Is it safe? Yeah, it's not going to kill
yes.
you. Is it going to be as enjoyable as it was when you opened it a week ago? No. But if it's your regular wine, and this is the thing, my wife all the time, she'll open a bottle, forget about it, and then she'll come up to me. Is this bad? I'm like, it's the wine you drink all the time. You
You
tell
should
me
know.
what. So you're basically giving me the
That's
poison to
awesome.
try to tell you, no, you know if it's bad. I'm going to tell you it's okay. You decide, right? So the aromas are just not going to be as fresh as they were. The fruit is not going to be as fresh, but it will not hurt you like all the other things. It's still okay.
Right.
And basically
I
the flavors just become unbalanced, especially for like high alcohol wines. The alcohol now is going to shine through. It's not going to be as balanced where the fruit and the alcohol perfectly paired or matched. It's one's going to outshine the other in a bad way. So you'll know.
That's a really good point about the balance. That's a really smart way of phrasing it. And I like to tell people that view your open bottle of wine as you would any other sort of leftover that you have in the house. If you didn't finish that pizza, please put it in the refrigerator. And the same is true of a bottle of wine. If you didn't finish the bottle of wine, put it in the fridge and it will last a little bit longer.
A little longer.
A
And
little
high
bit longer.
sugar,
Yes.
anything with higher sugar, higher acid will last a little bit
Yes,
longer
that's true. That
typically.
is
So
very true.
next, an article in mash.com, another publication I've been following a lot. I talked about the case against recorking your bottle of wine. In a past episode, Kim just talked about this, how she uses her little stopper gadget because she doesn't like jamming the cork in. And they were basically saying, don't put that cork back in, Kim. Is there a reason to avoid it? And they're saying it can make the wine taste stale or flat. It was kind of interesting. What'd you think?
So I think it's more about the oxygen in there that they were talking about trying to so their whole idea in this article was when you recork a bottle of wine and you've already consumed half of it, you now have half a bottle full of oxygen. And so that is going to work on degrading that wine a whole lot faster. So they're saying maybe, transfer it into a smaller container or put it in a mason jar. I actually have a device. It's not really a device. It's a preservation system that has like a plunger. And so you pour your bottle of wine into this thing and then you press your hand down on the plunger and it creates an airtight seal so that you have any amount of wine that you have in here, you keep it separated from oxygen. So I'm doing some experiments with that as well. But that's, kind of along the same lines where the idea is that you are just trying to keep the wine from being exposed to any amount of oxygen, and that will keep it fresher for a little bit longer.
The Psalm in this article, Kim, made a statement saying that if you put the cork back in the open wine, the cork is actually going to allow oxygen in because it's not completely sealed. But that whole process would take a very long time. So
It's
I don't
so
know.
much more about the oxygen that's already in the
Yeah,
bottle.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
They would
I
make
don't
it
I
look
don't
like,
understand. Yeah, no. That I
and he was
I
a sommelier, so that was kind of surprising to me to say that.
well, I'm kind of the equivalent too, so I mean,
Yeah, but you
so am
say
I, man. So am
intelligent
I.
things, not like I don't know what this guy was talking about.
Who
But
is this guy?
yeah,
Yeah.
but the best is, smaller format bottle. Take that air out in some sort of nice tight wine stopper. So just a quick tip on that. And then finally, Mash.com for our bubbly Queen Kim. There was an
Yay.
article, and I usually save these to our New Year's show, but we had to bring it up today. How long is champagne good for after opening, Kim?
It depends on your definition of good. So, if it is the flavor of the wine, because champagne is indeed a wine, that's one thing. But if it is the sparkle, if it's the bubble, then that's a whole different thing. So I feel like if you really are enjoying that bottle of champagne because of the carbonation and because of the bubble, you really do need to drink it within a couple of hours of having opened the bottle. Anything after that, and you are massively going to miss out on the carbonation. Yeah. So drink it as soon as you open it, hopefully with some friends and family. If you do have some left over, then I do advise using a specially made sparkling wine cover, which has like a spring-loaded device in there, which will keep the carbonation in as best it can. And it also offers a level of protection where it will not shoot off the bottle because of the carbonation. So you have to be very careful that you can't use just a regular old stopper in a bottle of sparkling wine because there is the danger of it shooting off and injuring someone. So please, if you do want to keep a bottle of sparkling wine for the next day, please invest in a couple of champagne stoppers. They're not very expensive and they are so, so, so useful and they will keep you from shooting your eye out. So please do that. And what I find is that, say I have a glass or two of, even if it's like Prosecco from a party or whatever, and I use one of these stoppers on the next day, it's not going to be still fully sparkling, but it's perfectly fine for like a cocktail or a mimosa or something like that. But if it's not necessarily all about the bubbles for you, because champagne, even without the bubbles, is still a beautifully made white wine, you can still enjoy it without the bubbles as a still wine for days after. Champagne is a wine that is made with a lot of exposure to the yeast cells. It has a very, very long maturation period. It doesn't go bad very, very quickly. So I certainly have had a few bottles of champagne in my kitchen where the bubbles have completely gone away and I didn't get around to drinking it because I was using it for a class. And we still drank it a couple of days later for just a still white wine, and it just tasted like fabulous Chardonnay. So it still will hold up after a few days. But when you discount the state of the bubbles and you just deal with it like a regular wine, I would treat it like any other thing. Stop it, keep it in the refrigerator. Certainly lasts better when it's cold, but it is really hard to retain those bubbles. And I know that there are all these myths out there. There's something about sticking a spoon in the bottle. Don't do that. Champagne stopper. That's like the only thing that will do.
So best for enjoying the carbonation of the sparkling, it's within hours.
Right away. Yeah,
The
within
article
hours.
mentioned for best flavor within 5 days. Did you agree with that?
5 might be a little generous.
With a stopper, will it hold the pressure for 5 days?
It'll hold a little bit of pressure for 5 days, but it also depends on how much is in the bottle.
Yeah.
So if you've only poured, say, 2 champagne flutes worth, and then you stopper it and put it in the fridge, yes, because you have a whole lot less airspace for those carbon dioxide bubbles to lose into. So think about like if you have a 2-liter bottle of Coke in your fridge, right? If you only have a glass of Coke left in there and you put it in your refrigerator, you're going to lose all those bubbles because there's all of that space for the bubbles to disappear into. But if you've only poured 1 glass of soda, you have a lot less room. So you're actually going to retain the carbonation a little bit better. So champagne is the exact same way. So
yeah,
if
good
it helps to
comparison.
think of it like soda, think of it like soda.
Good comparison. And I'm glad when it does go flat that you still drink it and enjoy it because it is good
Yeah.
quality grapes they're using.
Oh, yeah.
And like you said earlier, you can't find that still wine in America. So enjoy it that way
Yeah.
because it's unique.
Yep. And if worse comes to worse, cook with it. Makes a really, really nice any recipe that calls for white wine, any sort of sparkling wine that has lost its bubble would make a fabulous cooking wine because they are all generally pretty high in acidity and have some really nice bright flavors. And those are excellent to cook with. So if you find yourself with a quarter of a bottle of cava or prosecco or champagne or whatever, and you have a recipe that needs a little bit of white wine, definitely use that because it will be really, really spectacular.
So that's it. Shelf life talk, including today beer and liquor and little background on Kim's recent training. So hope our listeners got something more than wine out of the show today, and we'll work more of that beer in as we go along.
And I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for listening to us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We have been your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lenzi. We are supported by Franklin Public Radio. You can find our past episodes on SoundCloud and iTunes. And as always, we welcome your questions and comments on our Facebook page, which is The Wonderful World of Wine. Cheers!
Wine, wine, wine.